I've reviewed a lot of watch brands over the years here at Ben's Watch Club, but brave isn't usually a word that comes to mind. Nevertheless, it's probably the best way to describe the brand we're looking at today. You see, they've sent me a watch for review, knowing full well that I may rinse them in front of 200,000 people. The brand in question is Swiss Watch Company. It's a small manufacturer who's been making watches for other brands and the armed forces since 1996, and then launched a line of watches under their own banner in 2018. While their timepieces are Swiss-made and registered in Switzerland according to their website, I believe their offices are actually based in the US, a comparable setup to the likes of Hamilton. While they may not have the heritage of a Hamilton, they do have similar pedigree among many watch enthusiasts, more specifically, my fans. Indeed, I've seen numerous comments to the effect of, "The watch you're reviewing is good, but my SWC is way better." This has always left me wondering, are these viewers right? Are these genuinely among the best value watches you can buy? I've wanted to explore that for a while, but unfortunately, one thing has always held back this pursuit. This is the Swiss Watch Company logo. I've never loved it. In fact, I'd go so far as to say I actively dislike it. I even featured it in a Watch Crunch post about the worst watch brand names and logos. Not a place you want to be. So when they reached out via email asking for a review, I was caught in two minds. Half of me wanted to see if this hype was real, while the sensible part of my brain didn't want to accept an invitation to roast a modest family watch brand. That wasn't until I read the rest of the email, where Jacob revealed that they had already seen my criticisms but wanted to send me one anyway. Now that is the response of someone who is confident in their product. When you're guaranteed to receive at least one ripping but still want to put it on the chopping block, and you know what comes next. They've shipped me 2 of their watches. Let's see if they're any good. There's no sponsor on this video, just an important message from us. Black Friday is here and we've got a revolutionary clearance deal on our Spaghetti Scametti Icon watches. It's your final chance to join the biggest con in watchmaking history. Troll your Instagram followers, friends and family with the ultimate affordable luxury timepiece, featuring our revolutionary Tinskin 3.0 construction and our game-changing Fragilite crystal. You'll even receive the remains of the middleman we eliminated to get the watch to you, all with an industry-leading 30-second warranty. Use code SPORTSCARFUND at checkout while stocks last at scametti.store. Link in the video description. The 2 watches I'm reviewing today are also down there as well. Unlike Scametti, one thing that is surprisingly good about SWC is the packaging. The leather pouches that these watches ship in aren't generic in the slightest. If anything, each has an individual look due to being made from slightly different cuts of leather, or at least different pieces of leather. You'll see this pair have a slightly different texture and tone. Functionally, they're head and shoulders above most alternatives. They can even double up as a dual watch travel solution, which is a notable value add versus most throwaway boxes. This approach, it just feels organic and refreshing. The 2 watches inside are the Trench and the Arc. The Trench is a hand-wound mechanical piece, while the Arc is a standard quartz one. Both are linked in the video description in case you're interested in picking one of them up. Let's focus on the Trench first, as I believe this is the newer model of the 2, and it's also the one that costs the most. My expectations are pretty high considering the £487 or $595 price point. After all, this is approaching Hamilton territory for a watch brand that most people have probably never heard of. It also won't fetch as much on the used market due to the decreased brand recognition in comparison. So the stakes are even higher, especially in this current economic climate. I'm glad to say that in terms of the build, this watch ticks all the boxes. For one, this case is beautifully thin, in a similar fashion to the Hamilton Khaki, clocking in at around 7.5mm, with the domed crystal pushing that up to just 9mm. It's insanely sleek on the wrist, and I'm glad they capitalized on the thinness enabled by that hand-wound movement. Its 38.5mm case is a little wider than some other field watches I've reviewed, and it wears more like a 39.5mm watch from my experience, but it'll still service all but the largest arms. Lug to lug is 45.5mm too, so there's no chance of overhang. Not only is it sleek on wrist, but it's even more comfortable than it looks. You'd never know from appearance alone, but this watch is actually not stainless steel. No, despite the silver steel-like appearance, this watch is completely constructed of grade 2 titanium, meaning it weighs a mere 48 grams with the included leather strap. Without the strap, it sits below 32. What's more impressive is the level of finishing. Some manufacturers charge exorbitant prices for titanium watches by citing how difficult they are to work with. However, I'd say Swiss Watch Company has smashed that notion with a precisely executed surface that could easily pass as a high-end steel watch. The brushing down the sides is very neat, and the polished areas are indiscernible from the likes of the much-lauded titanium Oceanus models from Casio, with a near-mirror finish across the chamfers and bezel. For those of you who appreciate a sharply cut timepiece, you won't be disappointed either, as the edges here are as razor-like as you can safely get. Great work, SWC. The case also has drilled lugs for more convenient strap changes, despite some straps featuring quick-release tabs. We'll get to that in a moment. Now, the trench doesn't have a screw-down crown, likely because it could induce increased wear on the crown tube threads, as you already have to wind it anyway for that movement. Still, so long as you ensure the push-pull crown is compressed during any water activities, the 1080M rating should serve you just as well in the ocean as in no man's land, if that's where life takes you. Another component that can take some punishment is the crystal. It's a sapphire crystal that's presented a bit like a vintage acrylic crystal, with a raised, boxy shape that suits the dial really well. While sapphire is the best versus scratches, it can induce cloudiness and limit legibility under harsh lighting. Luckily, the extensive treatment SWC uses means that legibility is only rarely an issue. According to the product listing, this uses 16 layers of anti-reflective coating, as well as an additional sapphire coating to improve the durability further. I'd say it does perform above average, but in all honesty, I probably need some sort of proper testing setup for this sort of thing, just to make sure I can test fairly across the board, but that's a problem for future Ben. This stacking approach continues when it comes to the dial. While from above the watch appears like your typical vintage style military watch, from the side you'll notice something a little peculiar. The printed numbers each hour have what I can only describe as piles of loom on them, to the extent that they almost look like three-dimensional applied markers. Now, I assume this loom is applied by hand, and if so, they've done a meticulous job with perfect placement across the board, which must be a difficult task for something this small. As you can probably guess, the low light performance is consequently excellent, with both watches having a long-lasting blue glow. It's up there with the Erebus Origin that I recently reviewed as one of the brightest too, though I no longer have that one on hand for a direct comparison. The only nitpick I have on the finishing front is the hands, which have more scruffy edges and marks than I expected, considering the premium execution of the rest of the package. While the finishing style is different, the final result appears cleaner on the lower end arc instead. In fact, before we get to the visuals, let's quickly skip over that one too. The arc they provided me with shipped on a Velcro nylon band rather than the two-piece leather strap that came with the trench. Unsurprisingly, the more expensive model has a better one, and while it's only genuine leather, it has already started aging in nicely, with a slightly lighter grain peeping through. I do get the feeling this will last a long time. Still, I'd say the nylon option is serviceable as well, especially considering the Arc's lower price tag. It's currently about £185 or $225 US. It's got a slight stretch to it and is fully adjustable as you'd expect, though at some point that Velcro will inherently cause the strap to start looking raggy. In the short term though, it feels very comfortable and feels secure enough for weekend ventures. Far better quality than that in the lowly Timex campers for instance, but I could understand if this isn't to your taste. It doesn't have the quick release notches found on the leather one, so you will need a pointy tool to swap it out. Fortunately, almost everything else has been carried over from the more expensive model. As I mentioned earlier, this one is powered by a lower end quartz movement, which is mirrored by the lower cost, but aside from that, the watch still has a titanium case, 100-meter water resistance rating, a sapphire crystal, and tremendous loom. In that regard, it's probably slightly better. Overall, the Arc has a more rugged, casual vibe compared to the somewhat dressier trench. While some of that could be down to the colour scheme, it's also evident by the blasted case finish, which gives this a subtler matte surface that should show scratches slightly less. It does look lower end than the trench, but it holds its own against others in a similar price bracket, especially considering it's titanium. The main structure is, as far as I can tell, identical to the trench, with the only exception being the flat bezel. The dimensions are the same, it's just a tad thinner because it's got a flat crystal. It even has a screw-down crown, so it likely fares better aquatically. Unusually, possibly due to the remodeled, thinner bezel, the Arc still looks larger on the wrist. I mean, even looking at them here on the desk, one looks like a 38mm watch and one looks like a 41mm watch. Some of this could also be due to the heavily stylized curved dial on the trench, which reduces its visual presence, especially from above. It's also worth mentioning that the two longer hands are nicely kinked to accommodate those arced edges. The Arc instead has a fully flat surface. Despite the extensive dial text, I'd say the trench is narrowly the better looking of the two. While it's not nearly as committed as the likes of the Vario 1918, it still brings a vintage aesthetic, incorporating stencil-like numbered markers, a sunken chapter ring, and a high contrast colour scheme. I see hints of both field and pilot watches in here, though this dark colourway provides enough versatility to almost stretch this into dressier territory, especially in combination with the fancy case finishing. The Arc still has some retro cues, such as the shape of the small second hand and the bold typeface used for the numbers. I'd say this one feels less Art Deco and more Americana, with the result being extreme legibility at all angles. Aside from the logo, I'd say they're reasonably attractive watches, but it's difficult for me to look past it. What I will say is that branding is far easier said than done. We've struggled since 2019 with branding for Ben's Watch Club, and we've only just landed on something that we're quite pleased with after 3 attempts. Even professional designers suck half the time. That said, branding for YouTubers is far less important than branding for product retailers, and that's doubly so for watches, where appearance is often a make or break factor. I'd say it's a credit to Swiss watch companies' build quality that they've had so much success despite this logo, as to me, it majorly tarnishes the cleanness of the designs. Instead of just ranting about it, I'm going to try and identify specific reasons why I think it doesn't look good to inform future changes. I saw in a comment in an existing review that they were considering a logo switch already, so hopefully my feedback proves somewhat useful. Firstly, fitting 17 characters into a single 8mm line is a Herculean task. You can't read the logo on these watches at a glance, which is a big miss. If there's one thing that these big corporations, they tend to do well, it's instant brand recognition. You don't get that here with a font this tiny and cramped together. I've heard SWC has some potential trademark issues preventing them from using those initials SWC on the dial, which would have looked much cleaner. If the full wording really has to stay, it surely needs to be spread across 2 lines, with the icon removed completely to compensate for this. Additionally, the cartoonish typeface present is far from the most legible, contradicting the otherwise utilitarian nature of their designs. I'm not saying make the text really bland and generic like loads of AliExpress brands, but something with more of a clear-cut appearance that better matches the quality of the product would definitely be appreciated, or at least the approach of the product. The typeface used for the trench text is certainly better, though I'm not sure that additional dial text needs to be quite so huge. Alternatively, you could do away with that text altogether and just rework the icon instead. The icon as in the logo, not as in the spaghetti scametti icon. This existing one, it needs to go, as you can't even tell what it is or if it has any relevance or meaning. The hand-drawn vibe also just doesn't work so well for most symbols, as this one, it just looks a bit like a schoolbook doodle. So I'd scrap it, or at least heavily modify it. A brand that's recently succeeded in this endeavor is Christopher Ward. Their previous text-based logo is pretty grim, leaving many of their watches looking lopsided. Their overhauled dual flag logo is far more appealing, and even serves as a nod to their Swiss-English setup. In fact, if the SWC staff are watching this video and you're thinking of changing the logo, feel free to just email us any of the concepts that you've got and we'll happily provide feedback on them. Or we can do a YouTube poll to get you a greater number of responses. This isn't an open invitation for every watch brand, by the way, but with some minor changes, these could score much higher. Now, in terms of build, these are solid watches, no doubt. I don't think they're industry shattering, as lots of commenters have kind of implied, but if you can look past the logo, I think they are worth buying. As it stands, for the Arc, I have to go for a 6 out of 10 in terms of style and a value rating of 7.5. The Trench gets a 7.1 for style and a 7.9 in terms of value. In some ways, this echoes my review of the excellent Orient Mako Sport, which was spoiled for a single, far more embarrassing reason. You can check out that video here to see what went wrong. Believe me, you won't have guessed it.